The rhythmic tap of his cane against the cracked pavement was a familiar sound on 78th Avenue. Clarence M. Doyle, 90 years young and a Marine through and through, took his morning constitutional with the same unwavering discipline he'd once applied to drills at Paris Island. The Oakland sun, a hazy disk through the morning smog, warmed his face. He inhaled deeply, the scent of exhaust fumes mingling oddly with the sweet aroma of jasmine from Mrs. Rodriguez's overgrown front yard. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. He might not be able to smell the salt air anymore, but he could still find a little bit of beauty in the everyday. Morning, Clarence. Mr. Calvin's voice boomed from his porch, a comforting constant in Clarence's daily routine. Mr. Calvin, a man whose girth seemed to expand a little more each year, was already settled in his usual spot, a worn wicker chair groaning beneath his weight. A half-eaten donut sat precariously on his ample belly. Semper Fi, Mr. Calvin, Clarence replied, his voice a low rumble, weathered by time and tide. He noted the small detail, the new scuff mark on Mr. Calvin's slipper. It was these minute observations that kept him sharp, his mind still active despite the years. He wondered briefly if Mr. Calvin had gotten into another argument with the squirrels. Be careful now, Mr. Calvin chuckled, waving a hand. The gesture held a strange mix of genuine concern and a hint of amusement, as if anticipating some minor mishap that would provide the day's entertainment. Clarence understood. Life on 78th Avenue wasn't always exciting, and a little stumble by an old man could be the highlight of the morning. I will, Mr. Calvin, Clarence assured him, a flicker of amusement in his own eyes. He knew his routine was predictable, a slow, methodical march down the block, yet, within that predictability, he found a strange sort of freedom. It was his ritual, his anchor in a world that seemed to be constantly changing. He continued his walk, the tap of his cane a steady rhythm against the uneven sidewalk. Each crack and crevice in the pavement was a familiar landmark, a silent testament to the years he'd spent on this street. He reached Rod's corner store, a vibrant splash of color amidst the faded storefronts. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful welcome as he entered. The air inside was thick with the scent of spices and incense, a comforting mix that always reminded him of his time overseas. Raj, a man with a smile as wide as the Pacific, greeted him from behind the counter. Sunday candy, Mr. Clarence, he said, handing over a small bag of butterscotch drops. Thank you, Raj. Clarence accepted the candy, his heart warmed by the simple gesture. He knew it was a small thing, but it represented the quiet kindness that still existed in the world, a kindness that often went unnoticed. He tapped the candy into his pocket, a small treasure to savor later. As he stepped back out onto the street, a little girl on a bright pink bicycle wobbled past, her pigtails bouncing. She looked about 6, her face a mixture of concentration and exhilaration. He watched her navigate the uneven sidewalk, her tiny hands gripping the handlebars tightly. He remembered that feeling, the pure joy of mastering a new skill. He smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached his eyes. Be careful now, he called out to her, the words echoing Mr. Calvin's earlier caution. I will, Mr. Clarence, she chirped back, her voice filled with childish confidence. He watched her disappear around the corner, a small pink blur against the grey backdrop of the street. For a moment, he felt a pang of something akin to longing, a yearning for simpler times. He shook his head, dispelling the feeling. The past was gone, and he had to live in the present. He reached the crosswalk, the familiar red hand flashing its silent warning. He stopped, his cane resting against the curb. He waited patiently, his gaze fixed on the opposing traffic light. The cars whizzed by, oblivious to his presence, their drivers lost in their own worlds. He took a deep breath, the familiar city smells filling his lungs. The world felt strangely quiet, a moment of stillness before the storm. He had no way of knowing that in the next few seconds, his peaceful morning walk would take a drastic turn. He stood there, a frail figure against the urban backdrop, unaware of the shadows gathering at the edge of his vision. The muffled laughter, the hushed whispers, the glint of metal reflecting the sunlight. These were the harbingers of a moment that would shatter the tranquility of his day and ripple through the fabric of the community. He stood on the precipice, his world about to be turned upside down. The morning air, still crisp with the remnants of night, carried the scent of exhaust fumes and distant bakery sweetness. Clarence M. Doyle, 90 years a resident of this earth and 70 a proud Marine, set out on his habitual morning constitutional. His pace was slow, but steady, each step a testament to a life lived fully, a body that had seen its share of battles, both physical and those waged against time itself. He nodded a greeting to Mr. Kelvin, watering his patch of defiant sunflowers, a ritual as predictable as the sunrise. "Morning, Clarence," Calvin chirped, a flash of gold from a missing incisor. Clarence returned the greeting, a quiet warmth spreading in his chest. This simple exchange, this small connection, anchored him to the present, reminded him he was still part of the living tapestry of the neighborhood. He continued his slow march towards 78 and MacArthur, a route etched into the grooves of his memory, as familiar as the lines on his weathered hands. Sundays were his favorite. Rog, at the corner store, always had a small bag of butterscotch candies waiting, a sweet punctuation mark to the week. He thought of those candies now, their sugary sweetness a comforting thought. The rumble of approaching skateboards barely registered over the symphony of the city waking. Clarence, lost in his thoughts of Sunday's treat, didn't notice the 5 figures closing in until their shadows fell across his path, long and distorted like figures in a funhouse mirror. He looked up, his watery blue eyes blinking against the sudden intrusion of the sun. Laughter, sharp and brittle, filled the air. A camera phone, held aloft, captured his image. A strange disquiet prickled at the edges of his awareness, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his days in Korea, a premonition of something about to go wrong. He tried to place the faces, young and unfamiliar, a stark contrast to the familiar tapestry of his neighborhood. He felt the tightening in his gut, a cold knot forming. These weren't the kids from Mrs. Rodriguez's house, nor the ones who helped to hold Mr. Henderson with his groceries. "Watch this," a voice snickered, the words laced with a casual cruelty that made Clarence's heart pound uncomfortably against his ribs. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the old instinct to protect, to defend, flickering within him like a dying ember. Before he could react, a hard shove, unexpected and brutal, sent him sprawling onto the unforgiving concrete. The world spun violently, the laughter echoing in his ears, distorted and cruel. Pain, sharp and searing, bloomed in his hip, radiating down his leg. He lay there, stunned, the taste of asphalt thick in his mouth, his breath caught in his throat. The world tilted on its axis. He thought fleetingly of the butterscotch candies, their sweetness now a bitter irony. Damn. He fell like a tree. Upload that. Tag it. Boom a drop. The words were punctuated by bursts of laughter, cruel and detached, ringing in Clarence's ears like a death knell. He squeezed his eyes shut, the pain intensifying, a wave of nausea washing over him. He felt the strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing the scene from afar. His body, his pain, seemed to belong to someone else. He heard shouting, the sound of concerned voices cutting through the haze of pain and disorientation. A woman with bulging grocery bags dropped them to the ground, her face a mask of horror. A man in a work uniform barked into his phone, his voice strained with urgency. Clarence opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh sunlight. A large, imposing figure knelt beside him, his face etched with concern. "Mr. Tall, can you hear me?" "Don't move." The voice was firm, authoritative, a voice accustomed to giving orders. Clarence recognized the insignia on the man's shirt, a USNC emblem, faded but still visible. A surge of relief, unexpected and profound, washed over him. He wasn't alone. He knew the voice, the tone, the inherent authority. It resonated with something deep within him, rekindling the embers of brotherhood forged in the fires of war. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Tobias Tank McConnell, former gunnery sergeant and current private security guard, assessed the situation with a practiced eye. The old man, Clarence, was a familiar face, a fixture in the neighborhood. Tank had seen him countless times, his slow, steady gait a testament to his resilience. Seeing him lying on the ground, vulnerable and injured, ignited a fury within him. He recognized the teenagers hovering nearby, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. He felt the surge of protective anger, the urge to mete out swift justice. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm, to focus on the task at hand. He had to get Clarence to safety, secure the scene, and make sure those responsible were held accountable. Across town, Moloch Wynn's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The video, grainy and shaky, showed the sickening thud of Clarence's fall. Malik's blood ran cold. He knew Mr. Doyle, the kind old man who always had a smile and a kind word for everyone. He immediately forwarded the video to Tank and the others, a silent alarm that reverberated through the tight-knit network of Marines. Within minutes, Denise Carter, retired Master Sergeant, was issuing orders, a voice clipped and precise. Rico Figueroa, who knew Clarence from the VA, was already on his way, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and concern. The wheels were in motion, the invisible bonds of brotherhood tightening, a silent promise of swift and decisive action. Raheem Jennings, the teenager who had shoved Clarence, watched the scene unfold with a growing sense of unease. The laughter had died in his throat, replaced by a cold knot of fear. He hadn't meant for the old man to fall. It was just supposed to be a prank, a stupid video for social media. He looked at his friends, their faces mirroring his own apprehension. Ty, the youngest of the group, was visibly shaking, his eyes wide with fear. Reef felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, unwelcome sensation. He hadn't considered the consequences, the potential for real harm. He had acted without thinking, driven by the mindless pursuit of online notoriety. The arrival of more Marines, their faces grim and determined, solidified the shift in atmosphere. The teenagers, surrounded by a wall of stern faces and unwavering gazes, shrunk back, their bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Martha and Jorge, neighbors who had witnessed the aftermath, stood on their porch, their faces a mixture of shock and concern, murmuring to each other in hushed tones. The incident, a seemingly isolated act of cruelty, had ripped through the fabric of the community, exposing the raw nerves of fear and vulnerability. But it had also ignited something else, a spark of collective outrage, a surge of protectiveness that transcended individual differences. The teenagers, caught in the crosshairs of this collective response, began to understand the gravity of their actions, the ripple effect of their thoughtless cruelty. The world, once a playground for their reckless amusement, had suddenly become a very serious place. The morning sun, a hazy orange disk peeking over the Oakland hills, cast long shadows across 78th Avenue. Clarence M. Tall, 90 years young and a veteran of the chosen reservoir, took his customary morning stroll, his pace slow but steady. Each step, a small victory against time and age. He savored the familiar rhythm of his walk, the slight ache in his knees a constant reminder of a life well lived. He passed Mr. Calvin, perched on his porch swing as always, a silent nod exchanged between them, a wordless ritual marking the start of another day. Clarence thought of the free butterscotch candy Roch, the store owner, would slip him on Sunday. A small treat, a small kindness that warmed his old heart. The world, in its own chaotic way, felt ordered, familiar, safe. Then the world tilted. A shove, hard and unexpected, sent him sprawling onto the unforgiving asphalt. His breath whooshed out of him, a painful grunt escaping his lips. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, and then settled into a sharp, burning pain in his hip. The butterscotch sweetness was replaced by the metallic tang of blood, a trickle from his scraped elbow. Disorientation warred with the creeping chill of fear. What had just happened? Laughter, shrill and unkind, pierced the fog in his mind. He looked up, squinting against the sunlight, into the faces of 5 teenagers. Their expressions, contorted with amusement, registered with a sickening clarity. One of them, a lanky boy in a red hoodie, held a phone aloft, clearly recording. Clarence felt a wave of nausea, not from the pain, but from the sheer, casual cruelty. His heart, usually so steady, pounded against his ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. He'd faced enemy fire, endured frostbite, but this felt different. This felt like a betrayal, a violation of something sacred. The quiet dignity of his existence shattered in an instant for a cheap laugh. Hey, what the hell is wrong with you? A woman's voice, sharp and indignant, sliced through the air. She stood there, grocery bags clutched in her hands, her face a mask of fury. The laughter died abruptly. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances, the bravado draining from their faces like air from a punctured tire. The boy in the red hoodie lowered his phone, his smirk fading into an uneasy frown. Chill, lady. He's fine. It was just a joke, he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. His voice, moments ago brimming with arrogant confidence, now wavered with a hint of fear. He nudged the boy next to him, a silent plea for support. But his friend just stared at the ground, shuffling his feet. A joke? He could have broken his back. The woman's voice rose, drawing the attention of passers-by. A man in a work uniform knelt beside Clarence, his face etched with concern. Sir, are you all right? Can you hear me? He asked gently. Clarence nodded weakly, his mind still reeling. The world was a blur of worried faces and hushed whispers. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat, a dry, rasping cough. Yeah, I need an ambulance. 2 elderly man just got assaulted. East 78th and MacArthur. Ari, the man in the work uniform, spoke into his phone, his voice clipped and efficient. The teenagers shifted uneasily, their initial amusement replaced by a palpable anxiety. The boy in the red hoodie swallowed hard, the weight of his actions finally settling upon him. He hadn't thought about the consequences, hadn't considered that this old man was a person, with a life, a history, a dignity all his own. He'd only seen a target, an easy mark for a viral video, a fleeting moment of internet fame. Now, the camera in his hand felt heavy, a leaden reminder of his stupidity. He glanced at Tai, the youngest of the group, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and regret. As sirens wailed in the distance, a dark SUV screeched to a halt nearby. A man, built like a tank, emerged, his movements swift and purposeful. Tobias Tank McConnell, former gunnery sergeant, now a private security guard, had heard the dispatch call and recognized the location. Clarence lived just a few blocks from his usual patrol route, He'd seen the old man countless times, a familiar figure in the neighborhood tapestry. This wasn't just another assault. This was personal. What the hell happened here? Tank's voice boomed, his eyes scanning the scene, taking in the gathering crowd, the distressed woman, the teenagers huddled together like frightened sheep. He knelt beside Clarence, his touch gentle as he assessed the old man's injuries. Moloch Wynne, a young Marine just discharged and still adjusting to civilian life, had seen the video circulating online. He recognized the intersection, recognized the old man. His blood ran cold. Within minutes, he'd alerted Tank and the rest of their network, a silent call to arms echoing through the tight-knit community of Marines. Denise Carter, retired Master Sergeant, her voice still carrying the authority of command, was already en route, organizing a response with the precision of a military operation. Rico Figueroa, who knew Clarence from the VA, was close behind, his heart heavy with anger and concern. The incident, initially confined to the corner of 78th and MacArthur, rippled outward, touching the lives of those connected by threads of community, shared service, and an unspoken code of honor. The casual cruelty of a few teenagers had unwittingly ignited a force far greater than themselves. A force that would hold them accountable. A force that would remind them that some lines should never be crossed. The crisp morning air, usually a balm to Clarence Dawes' 90-year-old lungs, now carried the metallic tang of fear. The world swam back into a hazy focus, the asphalt a rough canvas against his cheek. His breath hitched, a strangled gasp trapped in his chest. Disgrace. The word echoed in his mind, a hollow drum beat against the throbbing pain in his hip. He'd been a Marine, seen combat, endured things most folks couldn't imagine, and now, this, knocked down like a discarded toy by children. The absurdity of it stung more than the physical blow. A blurry kaleidoscope of concerned faces hovered above him. Voices, some sharp with panic, others murmuring reassurances, washed over him in a confusing tide. He tried to push himself up, the ingrained instinct to get back on his feet overriding the protesting signals from his body. A hand, gentle but firm, pressed against his shoulder. "Still with us, sir." The voice, deep and resonant, cut through the chaotic symphony of the street. Clarence blinked, his vision slowly clearing. He saw the worried frown of Mrs. Henderson, the woman with the overflowing grocery bags who always complimented his garden. He recognized the anxious face of young Martha from across the street, her hand clutching her phone. And then, he saw him, a figure that seemed to solidify the air around him, a presence that radiated an aura of controlled power. Broad shoulders, close-cropped hair, the unmistakable bearing of a soldier. Not just any soldier, a Marine. Tobias Tank McConnell felt the cold knot tighten in his gut as he knelt beside the fallen veteran. The message from Moloch had been terse, frantic. "They got Door." 3 words that had sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, propelling him out the door and into his truck. He'd known Clarence for years, a quiet, dignified man who took his daily walks with the same unwavering discipline he'd once brought to the battlefield. Seeing him lying here, vulnerable and disoriented, ignited a fury Tank hadn't felt in years. He scanned the surrounding faces, searching for the perpetrators. He spotted them huddled near the corner, their bravado replaced with a palpable fear. Kids, barely old enough to shave. He recognized the look in their eyes, the stunned realization that their reckless act had consequences they hadn't anticipated. More Marines began to arrive, materializing seemingly out of thin air. Denise Carter, a retired master sergeant whose sharp gaze could cut through steel, took charge of the growing crowd. "He needs space. Step back. Let the paramedics work when they get here." Her voice, though calm, carried an unmistakable authority that even the most agitated bystanders obeyed. Rico Figueroa, who knew Clarence from the VA, knelt beside Tank, his face etched with concern. "Easy, Clarence. We got you." The knot in Tank's gut loosened slightly. The Marines were here. Things were under control. He shifted his attention back to Clarence, gently adjusting the old man's coat. He saw the flicker of recognition in Clarence's eyes, the subtle easing of tension in his shoulders. It wasn't just the physical presence of the Marines. Tank knew. It was the unspoken understanding, the shared history, the invisible bond that connected them. A brotherhood forged in fire and tempered by time. Clarence focused on the familiar emblem on Tank's cap. The eagle, globe, and anchor. A symbol of belonging, of shared sacrifice. The fear that had gripped him began to recede, replaced by a wave of profound gratitude. He wasn't alone. He was surrounded by his own. Across the street, Martha watched the scene unfold, her initial panic giving way to a strange sense of awe. She'd seen Clarence every day for years, a quiet fixture in the neighborhood. She'd never realized the depth of the connections that bound him to this community, to these men who seemed to emanate an awe of quiet strength. It was more than just a group of veterans coming to the aid of a fallen comrade. It was a testament to something deeper, something powerful and enduring. The arrival of the paramedics brought a flurry of activity, but the atmosphere remained strangely calm. The chaotic energy of the initial moments replaced by a sense of order and purpose. As they carefully lifted Clarence onto a stretcher, he caught Tank's eye. A faint smile touched his lips. He knew he was in good hands. The teenager who had shoved Clarence, watched from the corner, his bravado completely evaporated. He'd wanted to create a viral video, something shocking and funny. He'd never intended to actually hurt the old man. The reality of what he'd done, the weight of the consequences, pressed down on him like a physical burden. He saw the faces of the Marines, their expressions grim and unforgiving. He saw the concern in the eyes of his neighbors, the disappointment in the faces of the police officers who were now taking his statement, the laughter and cheers of his friends. The fleeting thrill of online notoriety seemed a distant, hollow memory. He looked at Tai, the youngest of their group, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't meant for it to go this far. None of them had. The image of Clarence lying on the ground, the bewildered look in his eyes, seared itself into Ree's memory. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the earthy fragrance of the park Clarence usually enjoyed on his morning walks. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the muted sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds. Discomfort pricked at him, a dull ache in his hip and the tightness in his chest. Where? He thought, his mind foggy. The crisp white sheets rustled beneath him, a foreign texture against his skin. He tried to sit up, a groan escaping his lips as the movement sent a jolt of pain through his side. "Easy there, Clarence, you took a tumble," a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the haze. Clarence turned his head, his vision slowly focusing on the young man seated beside the bed. He wore a crisp and familiar uniform, dark green, almost black, with sharp lines and insignia that Clarence's tired eyes couldn't quite decipher. A soldier, he wondered, a flicker of recognition stirring within him. Something about the young man's posture, the quiet strength in his stillness, resonated with a part of Clarence he hadn't accessed in years. "Who?" Clarence started, his voice raspy, like dry leaves crumbling. "Moloch Wynne, sir, Marine." The young man stood, offering a respectful nod. "Just keeping an eye on you," Marine Clarence repeated, the word a bum on his confusion. The memories, though distant, weren't entirely faded. The camaraderie, the discipline, the unwavering sense of duty. They resurfaced like ghosts, comforting in their familiarity, a Marine. It explained the quiet vigilance, the almost imperceptible way he held himself, ready for anything. "I better be alive," he grumbled, attempting a weak smile. "Can't have you wasting time on a corpse." Mollet chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that eased some of the tension in the room. "You're tough, Clarence. Doc says you'll be back on your feet in no time." He adjusted the blanket around Clarence's legs, a small gesture of care that resonated deeply. Clarence closed his eyes for a moment, the pain a persistent thrum beneath his skin. He remembered the park, the morning sun warm on his face, the familiar greeting from Mr. Calvin, and then a blur of motion, a harsh shove, the ground rushing up to meet him. The anger, hot and sharp, flared again. Those kids, but then something shifted within him. The anger didn't fade, not exactly, but it morphed into something else, a deep, unsettling sadness. He opened his eyes, meeting Malik's steady gaze. "Toast, boss," he began, his voice barely a whisper. He hesitated, grappling with the unfamiliar emotion welling up within him. He'd been angry, yes, but now, he felt a strange, unexpected empathy. Malik's expression remained neutral, though Clarence sensed a keen awareness in his dark eyes, an unspoken question hanging in the air. "Those boys," Clarence repeated, his voice gaining a bit of strength. "I don't want jail for them." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken thoughts. Malik's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. Clarence could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the unspoken question forming. "Why? I don't want jail for them," Clarence insisted, his voice firm now, the conviction solidifying within him. "A shove don't make them monsters. It makes them last." He thought of his own youth, the reckless abandon, the mistakes made, the lessons learned the hard way. He thought of the war, the horrors witnessed, the friends lost. He'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, and yet he'd also seen the best. The courage, the sacrifice, the unwavering bond of brotherhood. Those boys, those lost boys, they needed guidance, not punishment. They needed to understand the weight of their actions. Yes, but they also needed a chance to redeem themselves. They hurt you, Clarence," Moloch said softly, his voice laced with a quiet understanding that surprised the older man. "Hurt heals," Clarence replied, his gaze drifting towards the window, towards the sliver of blue sky visible between the buildings. "But a soul takes longer," he sighed, a weary sound that echoed the weight of his years. "They ain't seen what I seen. They ain't lived what I lived. They just need a little direction." Mollett remained silent, absorbing Clarence's words. He'd expected anger, resentment, a demand for retribution. Instead, he was met with compassion, with a wisdom that transcended the immediate pain. He looked at the old man, his frail body bearing the marks of time and the recent assault, and felt a profound respect bloom within him. He understood the unspoken plea in Clarence's eyes. A plea not for vengeance, but for understanding, for a chance to mend what was broken. The weight of that plea settled on his shoulders, heavy yet strangely uplifting. It was a burden he was willing to bear, a responsibility he felt compelled to uphold. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that the other Marines, his brothers, would feel the same. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clarence's door's living room, the dust motes dancing in the golden light like tiny, ethereal ballerinas. He sat in his worn armchair, the familiar indent of his body molded into the cushions, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled in his hands. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was a comforting presence, a steady rhythm in the symphony of his life. His gaze drifted to the window, where the maple tree he planted as a sapling now stood tall and proud, its leaves tinged with the first blush of autumn. He remembered the day he put it in the ground, a young man returned from the war, full of hope and uncertainty, a future stretching before him like an uncharted sea. Now, at 90, that future was mostly behind him, a landscape of memories both joyous and painful, etched into the lines on his face like the rings of that old maple. A gentle knock at the door broke the quiet reverie. Clarence straightened, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. The last knock he'd heard had been the prelude to he pushed the thought away, his hand instinctively reaching for the cane leaning against the armrest. "Coming," he called, his voice stronger than he expected. As he opened the door, a wave of warmth washed over him, a feeling so profound it almost buckled his knees. There, on his porch, stood Mrs. Henderson from next door, a plate of steaming lasagna in her hands. "Just thought you might like a home-cooked meal, Clarence," she said, her smile as warm as the dish she held. "Well, now, isn't that kind of you?" Clarence replied, his heart swelling with a gratitude that tightened his throat. He accepted the lasagna, his fingers brushing hers, a small gesture that spoke volumes. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Behind Mrs. Henderson, he saw a small group of familiar faces. Mr. Calvin, the retired teacher who always greeted him on his morning walks. Raj from the corner store who slipped him an extra piece of butterscotch candy every Sunday. Even Martha and Jorge, the young couple who'd just moved in across the street. Each held a small gift, a symbol of their shared concern, a silent promise of support. "We wanted to make sure you were settling back in all right," Mr. Calvin said, his voice gentle. Clarence felt a lump forming in his throat, a strange mixture of sadness and profound relief. He'd lived in this neighborhood for over 50 years, and yet, he'd never felt this sense of belonging, this tangible outpouring of love. As he ushered them inside, his eyes landed on a group standing slightly apart, their heads bowed, their postures stiff with a mixture of nervousness and shame. The teenagers. He recognized Ree, the one who'd shoved him, and Ty, the youngest, his eyes wide and filled with a remorse that seemed to emanate from the depths of his soul. Clarence's grip tightened on his cane. The memory of the fall, the sharp pain, the humiliation, it was still there. A phantom limb of pain that throbbed beneath the surface. Yet, looking at these young faces etched with regret, he felt a strange stirring of forgiveness. He'd seen enough in his life. Enough violence, enough hatred, to know that holding on to anger was like clutching a burning coal. It only hurt the one who held it. The conversation flowed around him, a comforting murmur of voices, punctuated by the clinking of forks against plates. He ate little, his appetite diminished by the weight of the past weeks. Yet he felt nourished by the presence of his neighbors, their simple acts of kindness filling a void he hadn't realized existed. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, reapproach him, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Mr. Toole," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry." Clarence looked at him, really looked at him, past the bravado, past the youthful arrogance, and saw a scared, confused kid. "Why'd you forgive us so fast?" Ree blurted out, question hanging in the air, thick with unspoken guilt. Clarence sighed, the sound escaping his lips like a tired whisper. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of 90 years settling upon him. "Because someone forgave me once, too," he said, his voice barely audible, the words carrying the weight of a lifetime of experiences. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The unspoken understanding hung between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity, of flaws and redemption. "I think you all just didn't know better," Clarence continued, his voice gaining strength. "But now you do. That's when choices matter most. After you know better." Ree nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. He didn't offer excuses, didn't try to justify his actions. He simply accepted the weight of his responsibility, the burden of his mistake. And in that acceptance, Clarence saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility for change. As the last of his visitors left, Clarence stood by the window, watching as they walked down the street, a shadow stretching long in the twilight. He noticed something new on the sidewalk, painted in bold, bright letters, "Respect the walk." A small smile touched his lips. It wasn't just a message about respecting his daily routine. It was a message about respecting each other, about recognizing the shared humanity that bound them together. Even in the face of hurt and misunderstanding, he looked up at the maple tree, its branches reaching towards the sky, its leaves whispering secrets to the wind. He took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling his lungs, and felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet certainty that even in the twilight of his life, there was still room for hope, for healing, for connection. He wasn't just Clarence Dawes, the old man who got knocked down. He was Clarence Dawes, a part of something bigger, something stronger, something that couldn't be broken. Not by a fall, not by anger, not by anything. He was home.